Hey guys, welcome back, and today we'll be learning about for loops and nested for loops in C programming. So if you've been following along, you know already how useful loops are for simplifying repetitive tasks. The for loop is especially powerful because it lets you control the loop starting point, the ending condition, and the increment all in a single line. So let's get started. Now, what exactly is a for loop? Now, a for loop is basically a control structure that allows you to repeat a block of code for a specific number of times. Now, this is especially useful when you know the exact number of iterations that are needed. Now, for loops have a very compact and intuitive syntax. Now, let us have a look at the syntax of a for loop. So, I'll be writing the syntax here. Just give me a second. Okay. So this is the syntax of a for loop. First, we will have the word for. Okay. This will begin the for loop. That is the starting of the for loop where we will define it. Then we will have the initialization. I will just explain in a second what does this mean. Then we will have a condition, and then we will have the increment. Okay. And then inside this, yes, I forgot to close the brackets here. Just a second. Yeah. Inside this, we will have all our statements. Okay. So what does this exactly mean? Now, whenever we write a for loop, we can break it down into three parts. The first part is initialization. Now here what will I do is I will set up the loop's counter variable. Okay, I will initialize the counter. Then comes the condition. Now the condition basically determines how long the loop will run. Once the condition becomes false, my loop will exit. And last is the increment, which basically adjusts the loop counter after each iteration. So in the first place, that is, we will initialize the counter. And the second is the condition where we will determine how long the loop runs. And last is the increment, which basically adjusts the counter or increments the counter after each iteration. So this is the flow chart of how a for loop works. So basically when a for loop starts, it will check the condition. If the condition is true, what will happen? It will execute the statements which are inside the loop. After the statements are executed, it will increment the counter or update the counter, and it will again check for the condition. Now, as long as the condition is true, this loop will keep on running, and once the condition is false, my loop will end. It will exit. Now, let us see this with the help of an example. Now, in this example, we will print the numbers 1 to 5 using a for loop. So I'll just type this again. So what we'll do here is first I will initialize. Okay, we will initialize a variable I equal to 1. So I is an integer. Let's say I is equal to 1. Then what I will do is I will give a condition. That is how long my loop will run. In this case, I want to print the number from 1 to 5. So I will keep on printing the value of I until it reaches 5. Then I have to make sure that the value of I is incremented. So at one point my condition becomes false and the loop ends. Okay. So inside this what I will do, I will print the value of I. So this will print 1 to 5. Okay. So I will print the value of I. This will start from 1 and then it will print till 5 and then it will exit my loop. So let's go ahead and run this program. I'll compile it, I'll run it. So I can, as you can see, we print the value 1 to 5. So this is about for loops. Now for loop is quite simple, whereas in some programs we require much more complex loops. Now here is where we'll encounter nested for loops. Now a nested for loop is basically just a simple way for a for loop which is inside of another for loop. So what happens exactly is a nested for loop is simply a for loop which is inside another for loop, and it is especially useful when we work with multi-dimensional data structures like grids or tables. Now the syntax for this too is quite simple. So we'll just type the I'll just type the syntax here for a nested for loop. So say the same syntax. First we'll have the initialization. This will be my outer for loop. I will have two for loops. One will be the outer for loop and the other will be the inner for loop. Initialization, then I'll have my first condition which will be checked, and then my increment. Okay, this is my for loop 1. Then inside this I will have another for loop which will also have an initialization, a condition, and an increment variable. Okay, increment operation. Now this for loop will have its own set of statements, and make sure we also close the brackets for the first for loop. Okay, so this for loop will execute its statements, this for loop 2 will execute its statements. Okay, so let's have a look at the flow chart. This too is very simple. So what happens here? First the outer for loop will start, then the initialization will take place, then the condition will be tested. Obviously if the condition is false, then my loop will exit immediately and the inner for loop will not be checked. Okay, once if the condition is true for the outer for loop, then my inner for loop will start. It will be, the value will be initialized. I will test for the condition. If the condition is true, the inner for loop statements will be executed and the value of the counter will be incremented, and every time it will be checking the condition, and as long as the condition is true, the inner for loop will keep on executing. As soon as the condition becomes false, my inner for loop will exit. It will stop and the control will pass on to the outer for loop, okay, for which the value of the counter will be incremented and then the condition will again be tested. So if the outer for loop is again true, the condition is again true, the inner for loop condition will be checked, and so on until both the conditions become false for the inner loop and the outer loop. That's when my nested for loop terminates. Okay, so let's try to understand this in a much better way with the help of an example. So what we'll do here is basically we will use a nested for loop to create a 5 by 5 grid where each cell contains the product of its row and column indices. Okay, let's do that. So first I will write the outer for loop. I will initialize the value I equal to 1. Then I will give a condition. Let's take it till 5. Let's print till 5. Okay, I less than equal to 5, and I increment the value of I. Then I will write my inner for loop for int j equal to 1, j less than equal to 5, and I will increment the value of j. This is my inner for loop. Now I'll print the value here, that is the product, %d tab character. Okay, then I'll do I into j. After that I will execute the statements for the outer for loop. Okay, the outer for loop will just print the new line character. So let's go ahead and run this. As you can see, we have printed a 5 by 5 grid where each cell contains the product of its row and column. Okay, so this is about nested for loops. So just a quick revision. What we have done in this program is we have created two loops. The outer loop, okay, with the value I, that is the counter I, will go from 1 to 5, and for each value of I, the inner loop, that is j, with the initializer j, will grow from 1 to 5 as well. Now each time the inner loop runs, we'll print the product of I and j, followed by a tab to create space. Okay, and at the end of each row, the outer loop moves to the next line, giving us a 5 by 5 multiplication table. So this is about what are nested for loops. Now one thing we need to ensure when working with for loops is that we should always keep in mind that the loop condition should become false, okay, to avoid infinite loops. So remember this, your condition should become false at one point, otherwise we will encounter an infinite loop and our program will not terminate. Always keep your initialization, condition and increment statements simple and easy to understand. Try not to complicate the way you write conditions, initialization and the way you increment values in your for loops. And one key point to remember when using nested for loops is to be cautious of performance because nested for loops can lead to longer processing times, especially in large data sets. So that's all for today. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to like and subscribe for more programming tutorials. If you have any questions, please drop them in the chat box. Thanks for watching and happy coding.